This is the 1968 Research Paper Conference. The topic for the 1968 paper is right here. In 1968 is considered by many historians as a turning point in American history. To what extent is this an accurate assessment? In your answer, discuss the following: national politics, foreign policy, and civil rights. This particular topic is a little bit different than some of the others because I am not asking for you to choose a side. Instead, I'm asking you to defend a point of view. So you're trying to prove that 1968 is in fact a turning point in American history. And you're going to have 3 paragraphs, a paragraph on national politics, a paragraph on foreign policy, and a paragraph on civil rights that you're going to use to prove that that statement is true. Now, one of the first things that you need to do is try to understand this term turning point. You'll see right here in the introduction that you do have to do research for your introduction. And one of the things that you need to do is research on this phrase turning point. What does that phrase mean? Generally speaking, it's the idea that before 1968, the world was one way, and after 1968, it was completely different. Now, that's a very informal definition. You're going to have to use the databases or paper dictionaries in order to come up with a formal definition that you have researched, put on note cards, and of course cited properly. Okay, so you're going to have 3 paragraphs. If you scroll down on your research guide on the class webpage, you can see that we have all 3 of the paragraphs listed here. So 1 paragraph is on politics, 1 is on foreign policy, and 1 is on civil rights. You cannot break away from that. That is the organization that you have to use. Now, within each of those paragraphs, you can choose which events you are going to discuss. So I have 4 choices for politics, 5 for foreign policy, and 4 for civil rights. So there is a little bit of flexibility in there in terms of which of these topics you get to do a little bit more in-depth research for. So my recommendation when you go to do your research is that you actually start with your textbook. See how it says body paragraphs? You're going to research the key terms that are listed below, and I recommend you start with the textbook. In the textbook, there's a whole section on 1968. There's also some additional information on some of those events on pages 721 to 722, but this 748 to 757 is all just on the year 1968. You can make note cards from those pages. Now note, those do not count as one of your 5 sources, so the textbook would be a 6th or additional source. So you have to use 5 other ones, but I would start there to learn the basics of these events and the basic information. So first thing I would do is you're simply looking up and learning about the events that are listed underneath each paragraph topic. And when you're looking in your book, or you're looking in databases, or you're looking in a regular book in the library, these are the key terms that you want to look up either in the index in the back, in the table of contents, or you can also, of course, enter these into the databases as a search item. You're going to start by simply taking notes on note cards about the events, the basic information, who was involved, what happened, when did it happen, where did it happen. Once you have the basic, then you need to start to look for the second to last bullet point here. Why was each event significant? In other words, how did each event change America? So for example, how did the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. change the civil rights movement? Remember that what you're doing in this paper is you're proving that 1968 was a turning point year. Therefore, you are looking for the ways in which these events changed America forever. Note, you're talking about the effects of these events on the United States, not on other countries. This is a U.S. history class. In terms of the analysis, while you're doing research, you're not just doing research for quotes to prove the argument. You're also doing background research for your analysis and research for your introduction as well. So what you should be on the lookout for in your analysis, you're going to have to explain before and after. Literally, part A of your analysis will be before the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., and you'll explain what was going on with the civil rights movement. Then you'll transition into explaining your quote, which is about how that assassination changed the civil rights movement. Okay, so I want to go back up for a moment. In terms of recommended sources, obviously we have the textbook pages that are useful for you. There are some lectures on the class webpage that you might find useful, mostly for background information. They may help you with both your introduction as well as part A of your analysis. Lectures also do not count as one of your 5 sources, but you can use and reference them in your paper if it is necessary. I also want to say, in terms of recommended sources, that over the years, the library has acquired quite a few books on the year 1968 specifically. I highly recommend that you check those books out and use those books. In addition, we also have a lot of books that cover just the 1960s in general. Any of those 1960s books, you can simply open them up. You can look in the table of contents, and many of them have a whole chapter on 1968. Or look in the index in the back and look up these keywords. In the end, when you write your paper, remember you're going to have a paragraph on politics, a paragraph on foreign policy, and a paragraph on civil rights. Within each of those paragraphs, you need to discuss 3 of these events. Okay, only 3. So there'll be an extra event or 2 for each of those topics that you do not discuss in your paper. Just 3 events, but they do need to be 3 different events that show how those events change politics, or how these events change foreign policy, how these events change civil rights. So make sure you are using these key terms. Don't try and find extra different events. This is pretty much every possible event that you could use to prove your argument. If you don't focus on these, you're going to be really lost really quickly with this paper. Finally, the last thing that I want to point out to you is, in terms of the introduction, you do need to do research. So as you are researching for the paper, keep in mind that it's not just about the body paragraphs. This information right here in this last section is all the type of stuff that you are going to have to include in the introduction. When we get towards the end of the project, I will have a day where we talk about writing an introduction and how to do it, and you will want to have some background information already on your note cards so that you can go ahead and write that introduction towards the end of the project. If you have questions while you're working on the project, please make sure that you're coming and talking to me either in class, if we're working on it in class, or of course, you can send me an email with questions or attend an access session where we are talking about the paper. Good luck.